Good evening. Welcome to the South African Equestrian Federation podcast from the horse's mouth. This is episode 36, and it is our discipline spotlight on eventing. And we're going to be chatting to Douglas Welsh, who is the current president of Eventing South Africa. He's an FEI Level II course designer, World Equestrian Games competitor, and general eventing enthusiast to discuss this wonderful sport. So Douglas, hopefully you're going to give us some insights on what makes eventing one of the most exciting sports to not only participate in, but to watch, and why the sport offers so much to our equestrian competitors in South Africa. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Georgie, and I look forward to it. Yes, let's share a bit of eventing with all South African equestrians.
So my very favorite in the research that I did before speaking to you tonight, Douglas, is I just do go and have a look around the internet and see what is on show from eventing from a news perspective. And the favorite thing that came up is there's a big meme that says eventing exists because even show jumpers need heroes. And I've come off of a great weekend of commentating at the World Cup Series qualifier at Stokkies Dry. So I thought the show jumpers would love to hear that. That certainly wouldn't needle them at all. But it just seems to be such a great fun. The eventers do seem to have a sense of humor.
Without a shadow of a doubt. We take it to another level, eventing. When you go to a show, it's not just how good your last round was. It's about you versus the course. It's about the camaraderie of the people. It's a fantastic sport. You know, you can't leave after just doing one round. You're there for a whole weekend. You're there for 3 days on long format. It's fantastic fun. We get to know each other really well. It's a great sport, yes.
So can you tell us, Douglas, what is eventing in a nutshell? So that we're bearing in mind, we've got a lot of people who are perhaps tent peggers and gymkhana riders who've never heard of, exactly what goes into it. And I can't wait to get to the tent peggers. I believe they're very successful. But if you can give us the 101.
Okay, Georgie, eventing initiated as a military precision training exercise in Europe, where they put soldiers through certain procedures to train them to go into battle, to train their horses to go into battle, to train them as a unit to work together. So they created challenges for them to test them as a unit, whether they're ready for battle. So these tests they derived into the sport over many years. It's one of the first Olympic sports that were equestrian sports that were introduced, whereby you have various sort of challenges that were created, jumping, galloping, control, fitness, balance, rhythm, and they're all packaged into it. And this, over many, many years, has now sort of like created our sport. And our sport is still evolving, I can assure you. It used to be a 5-phase where it included roads and tracks, and it had fitness aspects, and two phases of roads and tracks, plus cross country, plus dressage, plus show jumping. It's now been reduced to a certain extent by taking out the roads and tracks aspect. I'm unfortunately old enough to have still done roads and tracks when I was competing overseas and understand what the long format used to be like. Today it's reduced. We now have 2 formats. What we deem as a long format, which we do over 3 days, where all the tests are sort of like expanded. The cross country is longer. We don't have roads and tracks and steeplechase any longer. So now
if I can just interrupt. Why were the roads and tracks and the steeplechase removed from the 5-day eventing?
Well, I tell you what really happened is that our pressures of running big international events, specifically Olympic Games, is that to keep our sport in the Olympic Games, we needed to actually compress it. We had to reduce the numbers of competitors to a certain extent, because our sport generally would take up 3 days, and it would be a long 3 days requiring lots of space and lots of stabling and lots of the pressures of international sport now are upon us. We have to reduce the sport. So even today's Olympic game is a compressed format of what we do at World Championships. So the sport, all sports do progress at some point in time. And that's why we've now had to compress our format to a certain extent.
Okay.
Some people say it's sad that we've lost the roads and tracks and steeplechase phases. However, there's also a lot of social responsibility on eventing because of the perception of the public watching it. Is it cruel? Is it
Yes.
pushing them too far? So there a lot of dynamics, and all the dynamics playing into one direction, saying, okay, we'll compress the format, but we'll still keep the challenge.
That's fantastic. So it's boiled down now to 3 phases. And what are those 3 phases?
Well, we start with the dressage, and dressage in eventing at a very high level, the Olympic and World Championship level, has quite advanced movements. Not nearly what dressage does at the high level, but we certainly have flying changes and half passes and pirouette and walk and various.
Listen, I would rather ride an eventing horse in dressage than ride a dressage horse on cross country.
I probably agree with you 100% there. And I'll speak about the safety aspects of our sport to understand what dressage actually does, and it's a very important aspect of our sport. So that's the first. In a long format, we do that on day 1. On short format, we do it as a first challenge always. On a short format, on day 2, you'd actually probably run cross country first and show jumping second, or alternatively on day 1 you'd run dressage and show jumping on day 1 and cross country on day 2. A long format, it's over 3 days, so it's obviously dressage, cross country, and then show jumping. And that's specifically because we have a lot of vet checks attached to it. So we'll have a vet trot up before the horse competes, and then after it's done cross country, we'll have another vet checkup to make sure that the horse is sound to complete the test.
Do they trot up the riders as well? I hope not. Most riders, I think, would fail a vet check.
Sadly, most of them would fail, especially if they've taken a few tumbles in the day. So that
and Douglas, I loved what I saw from the military side. They said the idea was that they had a horse that was, even though the cross country phase is the most heavily weighted, and I would appreciate you talking about the penalty spread with us. The cross country is obviously the most heavily weighted. It said that your horse is fit and brave enough for that phase, but it has to be disciplined and obedient enough to do the dressage on the first day, even though it's so fit. And then after doing this massive cross country, it must still be a careful horse that would still be careful in a show jumping round after having done that big phase. So you guys are really creating what would be, I don't want to throw any shade at the other sports because all of these disciplines are incredible, but that's a very well-rounded athlete and rider.
It's known as the triathlon of equestrian sport, whereby we're asking the horse to be a bit of everything. And there's certain research being done saying that the better the horse is in dressage, the better chance it has of actually completing the cross-country phase as long as it's fit. And the better it will show jump in the end. And statistically, that's all weighted. So as much as we think, most times I used to think, I got into eventing while I was in the army training under Peter Stark, and I was a show jump up to that point in time, and I wasn't very interested in dressage at all. In fact, dressage was something you steered away from because of various aspects. And so it now turns out that it is such a fundamentally important part of eventing that internationally, you generally will win on your dressage score because the horses are so good at cross country and so good at show jumping that the top probably 10 might be separated by a pole or 2 in the show jumping, but the cross country scores will be 0 cross country and 0 time. And that's how it's got to at this point in time. So the dressage is very, very important in our sport.
Can we discuss briefly the weighting of each of the phases from a penalty perspective? So, for example, in cross country, a stop is a lot more heavily penalized than in show jumping.
Absolutely. If you stop in cross country, you must understand, Georgie, that dressage would be you get your point, and what we do is it'll be turned into a percentage, and so we'll turn it into a negative percentage in respect of if you got a 70% test, you get 30 penalties. A 75% test will give you 25 penalties. So we turn it into a penalty score. So that's the starting point. Thereafter in cross country, a stop equals 20 penalties, the first stop. The second stop in the same obstacle equals 40. We weight that very heavily. And Chris